I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. My name is Jeff Lundy, Mayor of Brooklyn Park, and we're here to talk about, normally the city has meetings with people, we have conversations, we listen, but with COVID, we're kind of stuck doing things differently. And so tonight is just one of those ways that we're hoping to engage residents and have conversations, the first of many. And so I'm joined with senior staff here. I have Chief Ingvaldson, our police chief. I have Chief Cunningham for our fire department. And I have Jay Strobel, our city manager. And what I'd like to do is turn it over to Chief Cunningham, talk about our COVID response, and really kind of focus on that first. And then we're going to talk about police and relationships and things that the conversation we really need to have.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. First, before we talk about COVID, I just want to acknowledge George Floyd, his family, friends, and the community that continue to mourn over his killing. And just stress, I know that you'll hear that message tonight, that we stand united with our community to work with our community towards a bright future ahead. As we turn the clock back a little bit to COVID, we started talking about this when the whole world started noticing that this was a significant outbreak. One of the first things that the City of Brooklyn Park did, and as your emergency manager, we stood up our emergency operations center at the fire department because we realized that this was going to be unprecedented, and we wanted to make sure that we had a response that was ready when it started to impact our community and our residents. So what that did is that brought our public safety staff together as well as our community support resources. And that was important because we wanted to look at the ability of our public safety staff to respond to 911 emergencies during a pandemic and make sure that we had enough resources and equipment, and we all talk about personal protective equipment and access to that. But also we wanted to make sure that we were supporting our community in a way not only today, but also in the future. So one thing that we did, which was very unique, is create a community support branch. And many of our residents probably received information about a survey that they could complete that asked some very just direct questions on how this was impacting them. And we actually use this in the EOC to gauge some of our responses. And one of the things that we noticed is just the fear and the concern over certain things, getting food, safety and security. So we were able to publish things out on our social media, on our website, and just other mechanisms, and then also to connect people to resources that already existed in the community. And just the overwhelming community support, some of the results that we saw were just so positive about neighbors helping neighbors and turning to each other to help each other in this unprecedented time. So that's been really our focus the last 3 months in COVID. In the Emergency Operations Center, we had that staff during the day and maintain a response force that if someone could call 911, that they receive the appropriate care that they needed during a time of a national crisis. That ultimately turned in, as we knew that this was going to be a long-term evolution. We worked with city leadership to get a better understanding about how COVID was going to impact city services potentially today and long-term. And with that, I'll ask our city manager to highlight some of the things that we looked at citywide. Jay?
Great, thanks, Chief. I appreciate that. Before addressing some of the COVID questions that have come in over the last several weeks, I too want to make a statement regarding George Floyd. First, I want to express my deepest regret and sympathies to the family and friends of George Floyd, the Black community, the Minneapolis community. Secondly, as your city manager, I want to make sure everyone is aware of my commitment to the continued work that the City of Brooklyn Park is doing to address the disparities that exist in our community, and specifically to identify and take action on those systems that we know are contributing to those disparities. So just wanted to make those statements before moving on to addressing some of the COVID questions. With regard to COVID-19, as the chief has shared, we've been hard at work the last 3 months to try to get our services online, work with the community to make sure that the community and our city staff are as safe as possible. So a few of the questions that have come in are, when will city offices open? So the first thing I wanted to share was virtually all of the city services that we provide, typically pre-COVID, have been available with just a few exceptions. I really appreciate and applaud the work of staff and their creativity and innovation of making sure that our services are being delivered in an innovative way, meeting the needs of the community and our customers. Second thing, all of our city buildings are back open with the exception of City Hall. City Hall is partially open for DMV services right now. It's actually partially closed because of some of the renovations that are taking place within the lobby in the front desk area. So we do hope that those remodeling and construction will be done early July, so we'll be able to open back up normally. We will likely still be taking DMV services by appointment or by drop box, which is the current situation, but we'll be sure to provide updates to the community more specific to that. Another question that's come in is, what is the projected impact of the city budget as a result of COVID? Several months ago, we did the work of trying to identify as best we could of what type of revenue impact is this going to have on our city budget. And we estimated about $1.3 million of a revenue impact, everything from reduced recreation services to potentially a reduction in property taxes. So we've identified about $1.3 million in revenue, not knowing exactly what impact any federal or state resources might have, and ultimately if some of our property taxes might come in a little bit lower than expected. We've also identified up to about $3 million of expenditure reductions in the event that those revenue reductions come in higher than we expect. Our goal is to end the year making sure that our expenditures don't exceed our revenues, but also delivering the services as best we can to our community. The next question that a number of people have had is, what is happening with our senior and youth programs and some of our summer events? We have had to make significant changes to our summer programming schedule, both for youth and seniors and people of all ages. So we would encourage folks, the new Get Up and Go brochures is going to be available on June 18th, and so we'd encourage you to check that out when that's available. You can also call our Park and Recs department to get the latest information on what might be available now and to sign yourself or your kids up for those events. In terms of events for the summer, unfortunately, our tradition of having our Tater Days community celebration is not going to be able to take place because of the public health guidelines. But in lieu of that, we are going to be having 3 concerts at our Community Activity Center. We're also going to be doing 3 drive-in movies at our Community Activity Center. And also want to let folks know that our farmers market is moving right next door to the Community Activity Center to the old Hennepin County Library. Finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is related to the question about what supports are available or have been made available by the city. The city has been very active in working with our community partners in a number of different ways. For example, we've provided $30,000 in emergency assistance for some of the basic necessities, working with a number of organizations to provide food, modest rent subsidies, things of that nature. We've also identified over approximately $250,000 in small business loans that went out to 71 businesses. The great thing about that is that over half of those businesses were women-owned. About 81% of those businesses were people of color-owned businesses. And for every business that qualified, we were able to provide some level of a small business grant. And we're also looking at potentially looking at doing additional grants if the federal reimbursement dollars will allow us to do that. Finally, if you are an owner or work in a small business and are trying to navigate some of the federal, state, or local monies that are available, we do encourage you to reach out to the city and we can help you with those navigation services. The other thing that we've been doing is we've been doing wellness checks for our seniors. We've identified as some of the surveys that the chief was talking about. A number of seniors have reached out and said, you know, I don't have anybody to check in on us. Would you be willing to do that? And so we have several dozen seniors in our community that we are doing that on a regular basis, and we're happy to continue that work. Finally, I would encourage everybody to go to the city's website and check out our COVID resource page. There's stuff, whether you're a business, your mom, dad, family, whatever your needs might be, there's a significant amount of resources on there, so we'd encourage you to do that. So, you know, we know in cooperation, working with the community, that will increase our likelihood of getting through this COVID pandemic. And so the city's here to work with you on that. And so feel free to reach out if you have questions or concerns, and let's all stay healthy. So,
I think one of the things that I wanted to ask both chiefs is just talk about early on when the effects of COVID were unknown, where people were really assuming the worst, is we still had to put public safety crews together, have people still respond to 911, which meant they were going in situations. And so I don't know if you want to take a minute or two, each of you, just to talk about what we did so that people dialed 911, they still got service when they needed it, because we also had to make sure our people weren't getting sick at the same time. And so I don't know, Chief, if you want to.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. Our biggest concern going into it was potentially experiencing a lot of absenteeism within the police department. So we had to make some changes to how we provided service. We set up some call centers where any and all service-related questions or reports that came in were handled by phone versus in person, so the officer didn't have to respond out and have contact and potentially expose themselves to that. We did a great job in working with the fire department, and I think providing the best PPEs we could for the patrol officers to deal with that. We also stood up, we kind of created 3 different waves within the police department, so that if, for lack of a better term, wave 1 became infected with COVID, we had other folks on standby that could come back and fill in the primary function, which is responding to 911 calls. And quite honestly, we've done fairly well. We've had, I think, 3 or 4 officers now that have gotten COVID, but are all back to work and healthy.
Thanks, Mayor. The partnership with the police has been vital as we navigated this, and we took many of the same steps. One of the things that we did is reach out to our mutual aid partners that we typically work with for structure fires when we need resources, and we all came together to look at what a regional response might be. So if we had COVID-19 going through our ranks, as the police chief mentioned, that we could make sure that we continue to provide that level of service to the community. We've been fortunate that we haven't seen that within our ranks. And really that's attributed to the personal protective equipment and some of the social and physical distancing that we had to do. Firefighters are very social, so we like to work together, we train together, we eat together, and we had to eliminate that when COVID-19 happened. So our crews have more or less been isolated, with the exception of when they have to go out on a 911 call. And we're now getting back into some more of our normal routines and training. But PPE has been vital for us. We've been very fortunate through our proactive measures in previous planning for pandemics that we had ample PPE on hand, with the exception of gowns. We had to do some ingenuity with protective gowns, and actually you might see firefighters wearing rain gear because they're washable, reusable. So we certainly thought outside the box on some of that. But certainly I think the proactive measures and being one of the first communities to stand up their emergency operations center and really putting that lens on it really helped be proactive. And just some actual numbers for you, because this actually came up as a question about Brooklyn Park specifically. So as of a few days ago, there were over 9,600 cases in Hennepin County. Just over 1,000 were in Brooklyn Park, and that's approximately 11% of the total numbers in Hennepin County. And then we look at the death count. It was 635 deaths in Hennepin County. This data is a few days old. Brooklyn Park saw only 32, and that's about 5% when you look at the entire data set for Hennepin County. So we actually are a little bit higher on just the number of positive cases, but lower on the fatality count in Brooklyn Park compared to the rest of the county. So really great to see. I mean, people have been really doing a great job at social distancing, physical distancing, staying at home as we tried to flatten that curve out as much as we could. So we appreciate that cooperation.
I think just one last question for Jay, maybe. The council was like, we wanted one source of truth, which is one place that everybody could go, because information could change by the day, grants, programs, activities, what things. And so we set up the COVID-19 page. And so I don't know, Jay, if you just want to take a minute and talk about that, because I think that was one thing people really appreciated, is the council, everybody just said, go to that. That's got the latest information. We had staff that were keeping that updated.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. If folks go to the City of Brooklyn Park's website, it's one of the first links that you can click on is to get to that COVID-19 page. It's well organized, so that, again, if you're a business, a family, we have information on there about restaurants, Up until this point, there's been only certain restaurants that have been able to be available in certain types of businesses. So we are encouraging, obviously, to support our local businesses, and that's one of the pages that you can go to get information on that. We've also had a significant change of information coming in from the federal level and the state level in terms of some of that guidance. And so that's been our place to put the most recent guidance. So again, whether you're an individual, a family, or a business, you can get that most recent information there. There's also some fun stuff there for, we know that especially early on, that there was a lot of kids stuck at home, and moms and dads are trying to figure out what are some of the things that they can do to keep their kids busy. There's actually some stuff on there for moms and dads to help keep their kids busy during this pandemic, because we know that they're stressed out as well during this time. And so I would just encourage everybody to check out the COVID-19 page. And again, it's got great tips on keeping everybody as safe as possible.
Well, I think I just wanted to share with residents that we know that COVID's not going away. We know that things are starting to kind of dial back up. People are getting back to normal, but it can come back this fall. And so I think some of that practice and things, that the reality is that until we have a vaccine, we're all at risk. I did want to share on behalf of the council, because we work as a team. There's the mayor and there's the council members, but all 7 of us make decisions. There is no single person. And so the council early on tried to identify ways that we could help people immediately. So we weren't interested in putting money into programs that where somebody could have stuff running in 6 months. They needed to be up in 6 hours. So we put our money into existing community groups that could and had already been doing the work yesterday, as we put it. If you're doing it yesterday, you can do it tomorrow. So we try to support them with grants, and mostly about food security. We quickly turned over to rent, and I think the county and the state really stepped in there. So what we did is we were a pass-through to those kind of grants. And we didn't try to say, we're gonna do it, we're gonna let that. But one thing we did know after the federal government did their response was their aid to companies fell short. And it fell short in that if you were a small or micro business owner and maybe had one employee or maybe just 1 or 2, that you were not going to get access to that money. And so what we did, as Jay mentioned, we put money toward that, targeting people in our community, small business owners very specifically, who don't have a lot of paperwork. They were not going to fill out long forms justifying things. And so we made a decision, rather than try to help just a few, we were going to cast the net wide. And one of the benefits of casting that net wide is it allowed businesses to still be eligible for county, state, and federal money. And so we did that on purpose to keep our aid. If our aid was too much, they wouldn't be eligible. So the council decided that was the path we wanted to go. Also, the council is very aware of the economic impact on people's lives, whether myself, my day job, we took a 10% cut. Every employee took a cut. Other companies took 20%. And so we know that immediately, your mortgage didn't change, but your pay did. And so we knew that we were gonna have to take a different look at what this was. And so early on, we used the foreclosure crisis back in the 2006 era to kind of be a guide on how we approach things. And we asked staff, and they delivered on being innovative and looking at things. We did things that, frankly, and I want people to be realizing this, is you're going to get less service. We did not hire seasonal code enforcement people. That is one of the ways that we were trying to save money. So as the summer progresses and people say, hey, it took you guys an extra day, that is where that stuff shows up. And I want to be honest with everybody who pays taxes that you don't get the service you want when you're trying to cut money. And so we purposefully, the council said, we know this fall is going to be a tough time and that we need to prepare early. And so we did that. And so I think those things, and lastly, and a couple points is just, one thing I've never done as mayor is issue an emergency decree. In fact, I don't think it's ever been done in Brooklyn Park. And so we had to do a lot of research. I felt not comfortable with that, because we as a council do things together. And so, but the times and the speed of which things were changing would require me to issue orders, and then we would go back to the council to affirm those. And I felt guided by our council members, who, even though it was my handwriting on things, their imprint was also there in every step of the way. And lastly, just want to say we've been really focused on helping our restaurants, who we know are suffering greatly, and a lot of them are small business owners. And I want people in the community to realize, just because you see a big national name on the storefront doesn't mean it's not locally owned. And so a lot of these restaurants that you see that are national chains are actually locally owned business owners who own one store. And so we've been trying to do things. We waive fees. We allowed them to break up their tax payments. We waived fees on water payments for the whole city because we knew people might have a little problem paying on time, and we weren't going to hold that against them. And so we did things also like patio. In 48 hours, we issued temporary guidelines to allow people to put furniture out on patio. So we're trying to be nimble, we're trying to be quick, we're trying to make things happen because we know that as the virus changes and the response, that we need to be quick as well. So as we move on to the next part, I want to also express my sympathies and condolences to George Floyd, his family, his neighbors, his friends, and the city of Minneapolis, who I think we all felt the pain, but they felt it much more closely. And so we know that in every communication we reaffirmed, we knew why that community, that angst and that kind of impact during COVID was also this. And so just want to say that that's not how we ever want to see an interaction between a police officer and a member of our community. And I don't think anybody looks at that situation with anything but other than disgust and horror to see what that could be. And so we're joined tonight by Terry Austin, who's not only active in our community, he's active in the Metro. And Terry, you do so many things. And I asked you, you're the best describer of what kind of work you've done, not just here, but Minneapolis, all over the place. And so before we start, maybe take a minute and talk about your efforts.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I would describe myself as a community servant. I run a small organization called Positive Image. Been working in the Brooklyn Park and surrounding areas, Twin Cities, for over the last 15 years. A lot of work I've done primarily has been in the Brooklyn Park area as well over the last 10 years. Positive Image, our mission is to strengthen families, help rebuild communities through service. And our emphasis is on fathers and at-risk youth. I work with the chief on youth violence. Been doing that a lot here within this community as well. I work on health initiatives. So we've just been doing the work. A part of my responsibilities is to go out and find and recruit men to serve and to show up in places where there may be a lot of absent fathers or men in the community that's maybe not doing the work. And so we want to make sure that our youth have good role models as well. So that's been my...
Yeah, and I want to thank you for, we needed a moderator and we wanted it to be real.
Yep.
And so we're glad you're with us. So I think at this point we're going to turn it over to you and kind of let you lead us through this conversation.
I mean, it's been one hell of a last couple weeks, not only for our communities here, but just looking at everything that's going on. And me personally, this last incident really hit home for me, because when I look at a person like George Floyd, that's 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 265 pounds, that's me, and that could have been me easily. And so my question to you, Chief, is why do you think now, do you think the George Floyd incident or that tragic incident or that murder that happened with him, why do you think it's hitting home with so many folks within the Brooklyn Park area, the surrounding cities, our state, our nation, and not only the world at this point, but why do you think this instance, with this particular instance, hit home? Because it has a different meaning when it's Minneapolis versus it's in New York, Chicago, and some other major metropolitan area. Why do you think it hit home so much?
Quickly, I just want to share what the panel had said earlier too about the condolences for Mr. Floyd and his family and friends. And I can speak for me personally, I can speak for me professionally, I can speak for the 106 other police officers that I work with on how much they condone the behavior that they saw. With that, I think why this one has been so impactful is we've had incidents like this in the metro area before. We've had 3-4 of them in the last 5 years. And I can share my experience with some of the ones in the past is I was waiting for additional details, additional information. Is there something I'm missing that could potentially make this justified by statute? Even although the community was saying they didn't care, nothing would make this justified. I had to take a step back. I've had a lot of community meetings after Jamar Clark, after Philando Castile, and in a lot of those the community was very frustrated with me because I would have to say, I can't necessarily condone the behavior because I'm waiting for additional facts. whether that was statements or video or whatever. This particular one, I came in that Tuesday morning. There was something different in the police department, I could tell. And people had just asked me, did you see the video yet? And I listen to sports talk on the way in so I can relax a little bit, and I said no. So went in, shut the door, sat in my office and watched that 10-minute video, and when it was done, I had nothing. It didn't matter why they were there. It didn't matter why they ended up where they ended up on the ground. What I saw was completely inexcusable and was murder, and it has been dealt with as such. So I think that has created the response from not only Brooklyn Park, but like you said, the world. And shortly after I got done watching it, ironically, the mayor called me and must have watched it, and his question to me was similar to prior incidents. He said, what am I missing? There's something that I'm missing here because I don't understand what I just got done looking at. And I answered the question for him. I've answered it for neighbors, families, friends who have looked to me like, explain this to me. Why did this happen with this police officer? And the only answer I have is it's completely inexcusable. There's no justification for it whatsoever. And luckily it was dealt with swiftly by the Minneapolis Police Department and by the Attorney General's office.
Do you feel as though there was a need, unlike anything that was really a precedent before, that the chief took the stance to fire those officers? I don't think that's ever been done, and that's something that's typically not done. They usually have a leave of absence or some sort. What are your thoughts and feelings of that sort? Is that something that the Brooklyn Park Police Department would have took a stance of that nature, or every situation is going to be different? How can you elaborate on that?
I would say that in the city of Brooklyn Park, our response would have been the same, because as I shared with you, to the officer that I've talked to about this, and I've talked to a lot of them at the police department, they're disgusted about what they saw. And they're also very disappointed because a lot of the work that we've done in the community, as you know, I feel like it's gone. They feel like it's gone. Like we're back to square one. And we're okay with that. We'll start over. But the relationships that they built, a lot of people have distrust in police, and rightfully so. I've said all along, what I would like community members to do would be to judge their police department. I think you probably saw Chief Arredondo's statement yesterday, and the part that jumped out at me, not only the actions that they're going to be taking down there, but his apology to police agencies across the country. And he said that he can't be any more remorseful for the damage that this has caused police and community relations across the nation. You know, going back to your first question, the incidents that we've had here before in the region have stayed pretty regional. This became national and it became international. And it was the actions of one person who's hopefully going to spend the rest of his life in prison. But I found that very impactful coming from Chief Arredondo, that he acknowledged that he's now forced us all to start all over again.
Okay. Now, Mayor, what are your thoughts on the George Floyd incident? How would you have handled that situation from your seat and your leadership? Just your thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, I think one thing is, we are different than Minneapolis. The mayor doesn't have. We have one employee we supervise. That would be the city manager, and so we have to put process in there and things like that. So I think that in what Chief and I, we have these conversations all the time, because I'll see something that happens somewhere, and I'll call the chief. I'll give it a couple days, and I'll say, okay, what's going on? What was the thing? If that happened here, I'm always constantly. And with that one, I was just like, they got to fire him. I mean, I was impressed because I know how hard it is sometimes to do this, that they did it right, I think within 24 hours. And I think the fact that it was live on camera, there was nothing there else. I looked like everyone else and was just shocked. And so it's one of those things that you look at, and I've asked Chief, what would we do? Because I ask that all kinds of times when I see things happen around the country, is what would we do? Yeah. to try to learn from that and prepare and to be better than that. And so having that thing is what they did. I don't think I could have done because I don't have that power, but I think we would support the chief who has that power. And knowing the chief, that would be our expectation, is that that person could never wear a uniform for Brooklyn Park. And so firing him was the first step, and then trusting that the legal, now the Attorney General, finishes it off.
Gotcha. Now, one of the questions that we get from a larger perspective of the community is, were these officers that were involved in this incident, were they poor trained? Is this a training issue, or is this a character issue? So how do you judge between it being, in your seat, Chief, is this a training issue? For example, you have an officer that was on the job for 4 days in this situation that he's listening to his captain or the officer that's in authority over him, that's a veteran, that's been there for over 20 years or up to 20 years, and all of a sudden this is his first week on the job, and then he's kind of taking orders from his superiors. So is this a lack in judgment or character or training? So help the community understand, because that's a big question that they want to know.
It's a great question. I wouldn't say that it's training, because what you saw, placing your knee on someone's neck until they don't breathe anymore, is nothing that's trained anywhere. It wasn't a technique that was done inappropriately. It wasn't a technique that was done too long. It was just a technique that was simply deadly force, and we do not teach you to kneel on people's necks. So I know there's a lot of miscommunication or misinformation about that police train that as a quote-unquote chokehold or neck restraint or those kind of things. That's not, we don't train at all to place anything on someone's neck. It's just not trained. So it's more of a character issue. It's a lack of humanity issue. To address the other officers that were there on scene, our profession is not unlike many others in that you do sometimes look to the folks that have been doing the job longer to kind of mentor you along, right? You think you got it figured out, but you really don't have it figured out, right? Until it reaches that point where, Chief Arredondo had mentioned this too, that at one point, one of the younger officers was recommending, let's turn him on his side. I'm not finding a pulse. It's at that point that the duty to intervene becomes paramount, and you need to step in, whatever that looks like. It doesn't matter if you're there 4 days or 18 years, as a senior individual was. Because I saw just today there was a letter released by some members of the Minneapolis Police Department who said they were representing hundreds and hundreds of members of the Minneapolis Police Department, that they were all appalled. So I think had one of those younger officers stepped in and prevented what ended up happening, they would have had the support of their peers.
I know Sandy had a question online here, is that there's been a national cry all across the country here. It's kind of picked up momentum about defunding the police department. And this is a two-part question as far as the departments go. What does that mean? Can you help explain what does that mean, defunding the police department? What does that mean, starting over? And what would that look like if departments took that look, and the overall safety of our community? Because I'm sure when you start defunding something and starting over again, you putting the taxpayers and communities and youth and single mothers all at risk of violence. And so we want to understand that defunding and what does that mean. Can someone elaborate on that?
If I can, I just think that right now there is no move to defund police in Brooklyn Park. So just lay it out there. I think that's the question people want to ask. Is there an effort to help reform, change things? Yes. And it didn't start 2 weeks ago. It started years ago when we started to get involved with things like Cities United, My Brother's Keeper, where we provide those frameworks. That thing that I always ask the chief, it's on purpose, it's to learn and stuff. So we know that there's a long ways to go, but there are a lot of things that get done by police that we need them to do. And I think if you were to go back to when I was a council member 14 years ago. I used to always say I want to deliver the best service at the cheapest employee. So when people talk about having mental health or professionals who deal with specific things, to me that's a financial decision, that we can get the best person to deal with those things and have our officers deal with the things that they're good at. And so that's one of the things I think the council is, and the council is asking, what other things can we do? I think one of the things, and I'll speak for the chief, and I won't hopefully not speak out of turn, but one of the things that I talked to our local state legislators is the ability for us to have more control over who continues to be a police officer. And so we need more abilities to help police our own police department. Does that mean they do stuff wrong? No. But when it happens, people ask, why are they still employed? And so we need those tools, and I think you've heard from Attorney General Ellison some of those recommendations, and so we're looking for some state law changes that would enable us to do things. But I'm not going to cop out and say, oh, it's the legislature. We own what we do, and so we try to make sure that we're providing the tools. I think we embarked upon a journey, 5-6 years ago, but probably longer, for community officers, where officers were meant to work with the community, the different mindset, I think. And so that we trust the chief and them to carry that out. So I don't know, Chief.
As I've tried to understand that, it seems like the conversation is to take funding away from police departments and put it towards other programming, mental health programming, substance abuse, those kind of things. It goes back to what the mayor had said earlier related to COVID. We can do that. There's just a lot of services we're not going to be able to provide. And a lot of those are related to community engagement. They are related to community building. They are related to community policing. We can take those core services away, or take those services away and just fundamentally focus on 911 calls and investigating crimes. Going back to when I started, that's what you did. I don't think that's the best service for our community, given the dynamics of our community. I think we need to continue to do those things. Having said that, the city manager and I had a great conversation with one of our council members today, Councilmember Russell, and he was talking about his desire to have maybe some of these more social type activities that we're taking up now, having those not be police functions and outsourcing some of those things. And I don't take that personal in any way. In fact, I welcomed it. I said, if we can figure out a way to outsource dealing with individuals with mental health issues, that means it doesn't result in a police call, I'm 100% in, right? So we've just started those conversations. Quite frankly, for me, I've been in reaction mode since I watched that video. We've been trying to make sure that some of the horrific things we saw down in Minneapolis in response to this didn't happen here, property damage, people getting hurt, that kind of thing. So I've just kind of got back now, like say Monday, Tuesday, to start thinking about policy changes or reform or those kind of issues. And I've just really kind of beginning to jot some ideas and notes down at this point.
One of the things that the community wants to know as well is when we have bad officers in other states, other cities, and they leave one position, they had some issues in another city. What's the policy as far as them working for the city of Brooklyn Park and being a police officer? Because we have a lot of that. We have a police officer that had an incident in another state that may come here and apply, and he may have had some racial issues there and a sort, and he's, so how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so the lateral entry officers, the criteria for them to be hired on at Brooklyn Park is the same as someone coming right out of law enforcement school. There's the same comprehensive background that's completed. There's the same psychological examination that's done. And then I personally have the opportunity to review their background. And to your point, Terry, some people are leaving for a reason, right? And that comes out in their background. And I don't take a chance or a fly on someone that's had issues with a neighboring city or a different state. Because if you're not meant to do the job, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. If you've had those issues in the community or with your administration, pretty good chance you can have those issues here with your community and with your administration.
One of the questions by Vandalia, she wanted to know, Chief Craig, what are your top 3 priorities as far as reform practices? What has been the learns from this incident? And so what things are we doing right? What are your priorities, and what things do we probably need to do better and reform and have some better practices specifically?
Yep. So I had mentioned that I really got around to thinking about these things on Monday. And last Friday afternoon, I think it was, the Minneapolis City Council passed the resolution banning chokeholds and neck restraints, which is important to understand the two distinctions between those two. Chokeholds are really not taught anywhere in the country. They just, no agency trains you to prohibit someone from breathing. Agencies have done neck restraints, including the city of Brooklyn Park. And it's a medically vetted procedure. We've done it for years. We've never caused an injury. But I know that the community's not going to be able to understand the difference between the two, because you're still dealing with an individual's neck. So effective on Monday, we prohibited the use of the vascular neck restraint within the police department and took it out of our policy. That was, for lack of a better term, was kind of an easy step for me to take, right? Just so that the community didn't see that and become confused with what they saw down in the city of Minneapolis. The second one the mayor touched on a little bit. I've actually had these conversations with some of my union members already. I think that the process related to someone arbitrating their discipline needs to change. And the reason I say that is arbitrators are paid. They're paid by the city and by the federation to listen to the facts and circumstances around this particular case and render a decision. What has always bothered me is these arbitrators arbitrate all labor issues across the state. They deal with nursing associations to teachers to MTC. So one day they can be arbitrating a decision on someone backing an MTC bus into something, and then they're going to turn around and arbitrate a case on excessive force within the police department. And what gets lost there, at least from my chair, is there's no accountability or reasoning to what impact sending this individual back to our police department is going to have on, one, our organization in our department and on the community. We've had discipline cases overturned. So it's my belief that you should have public safety arbitrators that are familiar with police policy, police training, case law, all those kind of things, so they can take that into account when they're listening to this particular set of circumstances. She was looking for 3. The third one, I think for the most part, what I'm cautious of a little bit is we're still going to have police officers, and dependent upon, I've heard conversations around eliminating qualified immunity, some other things. Some of those steps scare me because current police officers will walk away. And it's not because they feel like they're not getting protected to do bad things, but some of those things were put into place to give due process to someone that's making a split-second decision at 2 o'clock in the morning. So not only, I think, would we lose police officers, we're already in a hiring crisis, and we have been for years. Nobody wants to be the police anymore. So I think if we rush to make some reforms just to make reforms, the profession's going to suffer, and in turn, the community's going to suffer. So those are my 3 things right off the top of my head.
Thanks for sharing. This next question is going to go to the mayor and also to our city, to Jay as well. And the question is, how do you ensure the Brooklyn Park residents are heard loudly when certain instances happen with the police? How do you keep the residents engaged, and how do they know when their voices are being heard? Because there seems to be a lack of understanding there of the disconnect between the resident when they have a complaint and their voices being heard with the police department when it's current.
Yeah, I think part of this, it's all happening during the umbrella of COVID, which means what we normally do is have large gatherings. We let people share their feelings, their emotions, their truths, let them speak. And we're kind of hamstrung by the fact that we can't have large groups because there's this other emergency as well. And so one of the things that I think the council does is we're going to take our time. We're going to let the residents lead. We're going to listen and let them speak. And so many of the council members are meeting with people. I had 4 or 5 meetings last week. I've had 2 or 3, and it's one-on-one. It's because of this, and to let people ask questions, and then try to respond and try to take ideas. And so I hate as much as I hate Facebook, I also love Facebook because sometimes you can. And so people ask questions, and I get to respond to some of the stuff. But I think most importantly is rather than rushing to do something to make a politician feel good, we're not going to do that. We're going to rush to listen to people, understand what they really need, what specific things can we deliver. And what I always try to do, and I think our council members, is to tell people when things are out of our control. Because don't make a false promise. We're going to take care of that. No, that's not right. Acknowledge the response, pass it on, and work with others. Those conversations we've had with state legislators on changes that we need them to do, we're having those conversations. And so I think taking our time, listening, doesn't mean we're not going to do stuff. It just means we want to hear what people are feeling. Because I also think before you do anything, you need to let people let it all out. And until they let it all out, you'll never get to that process of, okay, now what should we do? And so we're really trying to take that step. Last week we had our first Facebook Live. This week, this was going to be a COVID conversation. We immediately shifted it, where I know my council members are having these conversations with pastors and community leaders. So I don't know, Jay, I probably took everything you were going to say. But
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Terry. One of the strengths of Brooklyn Park is the fact that how we want to engage our community, listen to our community, help inform our decision making as staff leaders, as elected officials. That's something that we pride ourselves on, and it's never more important than to do it in a situation like this. And as the mayor said, last week's meeting, this week's meeting, we know that our council members, the mayor, are having lots of conversations, individual conversations within the community. We hope to likely set up additional conversations like this specific to each of our districts, our East, Central, and West District, so that we can provide more opportunities for the community to share their voices and turn that into good policy. And so we are looking forward to those opportunities. And a resident can always can go on our website, can send me a note, can send the mayor a note, can send the rest of the council a note, can send the chief a note, and we welcome those as well. So we really invite the engagement and the participation in our community to help us get to a place where our community wants us to in terms of the evolution of our police department.
The next question, Chief Craig, is how have the city of Brooklyn Park have we had peaceful protests, or has there been any vandalism of any type, sort? How have we handled those situations? How's the temperature so far in the city over the last week or two?
So we stepped up our presence a lot when what was happening in Minneapolis was happening. And it seemed, at least in Brooklyn Park, and I can say really for our neighbors too, Brooklyn Center, some others, that our presence really moved people along. And we really did not have anything close to what you saw in Minneapolis. We did have a couple cases of people trying to take advantage of the situation that were, lack of a better term, our local criminals that, damaged some windows, went in and tried to loot and steal at a couple different places. We actually made I think probably 4 arrests, but it was very sporadic, and that was the very first 2 nights. And after that, I think just our presence kept people moving along. The curfew that many cities put into place and that Mayor Lundy did, at first I was, as he can probably share with you, I was a little apprehensive about that. I didn't know what the enforcement of that would look like. But 100% credit to the residents of Brooklyn Park. The streets were empty. And the police officers that were out doing the work, coming back, they said, I can't believe people aren't out trying to challenge us on this. You try to make me go home. They said the streets were empty, which made our job so much easier because those that were out and wanted to do things that they shouldn't do, it was easier for us to deal with those situations.
Got it. And I'm sure, Mayor, that made you very happy as well to know that the residents here in the Brooklyn Park and surrounding areas are somewhat being compliant with the curfew and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, if I may add
no,
on
please.
that. I pride myself on how many ways people can connect with me. And I shared with everyone that I had over 1,200, I call it connection points, from Thursday until Sunday. And it was all about people were watching on TV and, the rumor mill was starting. And so the curfew, people were actually, I thought people would be mad. Here's the mayor issuing stay at home, and it was the opposite. But what we did is every morning we gave a sit rep to the community. We said, here's what happened last night. We didn't hide stuff. We told them a couple stores. And then by Monday, people were like, it was quiet. And so I think people felt okay. And when it came time, people felt like they knew what was going on. There was no hiding. Stuff was going on. It was all out for everybody to hear. So I think that made a difference.
There's a question from Jason that says they want to know how diverse is the Brooklyn Park Council and how diverse is the Brooklyn Park Police Department, and in what ways are we doing to improve diversity across the board in those two areas?
I think I can answer the council part first. We have two members of diverse backgrounds, and one Liberian American, I think Heritage, and then a Hmong American. And then I think one of the ways that we're trying to get people come off committees to run for council. Almost everybody who's on the council was on a committee, so we try to make sure that we are capturing as wide a net onto our city committees, because that's where they get experience, they become better candidates, and they run for office. And so I think you're starting to see more candidates, more things, and I think they're campaigning better because they're on the budget committee. And they can answer budget questions. And when they go door to door and people are like, well, tell me about this, they answer those questions. That's a good candidate. And so we know that if we get those people, that they're gonna have that chance. And so that's what we're trying to do, is get that farm team going. And I think we're starting to see that starting to play out, and the communities are getting involved on that. And I think I'd say on our way.
Good.
Because we went from none to 1 to 2, and we got an election this year. And so we'll see what happens with that.
Well, Chief, how are you handling the diversity and inclusion in your department?
So I think the question started with some numbers. Our authorized strength is 107 right now, sworn officers. We had the numbers run today. We're at about 17% people of color within the sworn ranks. And then you add in our 50 non-sworn individuals, our support staff, combined with our sworn, and we're about 23%. Both those numbers, I compared them to 2010 because in this profession, it's a very slow turnover. Most people get into this profession and do it for 20, 30 years till they can draw their pension. So within 10 years, we've doubled in both. And how we're trying to do that, I had talked a little bit earlier about people not wanting to be the police. We have a cadet program, which is strictly for diverse individuals to come work at the police department. And while they're doing that, we pay for their tuition so that they can become law enforcement eligible. And once they become law enforcement eligible, we promote them to the rank of police officer. And we found over the last several years that just putting out your standard job posting does not work for the cadet program. Given some of the issues that we've had in the region even prior to Mr. Floyd, a lot of individuals of color have no desire to do this job. So, and rightfully so, I understand that. We've had to go intentionally into our high schools and try to find folks with our school resource officers that have expressed even a minor interest in law enforcement, and get them into the building, get them on ride-alongs, introduce them to police officers, let them know what the culture is, and then really connect with the parents and say, we'll pay for some tuition just so you know if you want your son or daughter to go into law enforcement. So that's our pipeline to create diversity in our police department.
And what about the fire department? How are we working on that side of the house?
Thanks. That's a great question. To be perfectly honest, as of today, we're not very diverse. We have one person of color and one female in our sworn ranks. I'm going on my 2-year anniversary, and one of the things with the support of the council and the city manager is further diversifying our workforce, and that's been a conscious effort over this past year. We have full-time firefighter positions that are opening up in this year's budget. And we completely changed our hiring process, very similar to what the police department does. That we reached out to our community, we made those connections. We had a competitive test to have people come in. It was a test that is just designed to measure a person's aptitude to be a great firefighter. And we're going to be running our own full-time firefighter academy, which outside of the large cities you don't see in a community our size. So we're very proud of that. We're very proud to take that forward step to diversifying our workforce, because it is a goal to be reflective of our community while providing great service. Our firefighters are very proud of what they do, and they do a great job. And that's really a conscious decision right now, is to further diversify our workforce, and we're still very conscious of connecting with our community and our community outreach. We strengthen those relationships in some of our community outreach programs, and trying to prevent someone, those accidents and injuries that happen in the first place and fires. So it is definitely our top priority right now, is to further diversify our workforce.
Got it. Jay, is there anything that you want to add with being the city manager as well?
Yeah, the diversification of our city staff is something that we've had some progress and also some challenges with, and we've not made as much progress as I would like, as I think the council would like, and some of our directors. But we will be continuing our efforts to make that commitment, and that's a goal of ours as a leadership team. It's an expectation of the city council. It's in our city goals to do that, and so we will continue to find those creative ways, as both chiefs just talked about, to make sure that we do make more progress in that area.
Just one thing that council worked with the fire department is we have, how many officers? 6 or 9, right? The firefighters originally budgeted for this year.
9.
9. So pre-COVID, I'll put that because now everything is underneath that, but we had 9 positions that we were going to fund. So 9 unfilled positions. And so we worked with the chief on setting up the fire academy, worked on ways of recruiting, because the council was like, we want to work to solve this, and we have 9 open spots. And if we don't fill them now, it will take a decade for those to start to cycle out. So we kind of work with the chief, the firefighters, to come up with a game plan to go out and recruit and make sure that we get candidates at the front end who can be a part of that process. And so we're very intentful about the fact that we want to start to do this. We want, because you think about our community, we do medical calls. Well, if we have people who have cultural fluencies or languages who come and they arrive at a house that needs, and 911 is too often the medical service, and if they have that ability and those language skills to walk in there and to be able, it makes our delivery of service better. And so, every one of our firefighters is an EMT, a sizable number are paramedics qualified. So that's really important. We arrive able to do medical capabilities, and we need people who have some of those language skills and some of those cultural fluencies.
Perfect. Chief Craig, I have a question for you. And my question is, do you feel that the union is too powerful at this point? Do you think they have too much influence on the police department and the way it's going?
I've heard that conversation around the Minneapolis union and stuff, and I wouldn't. It goes to the arbitration. That's the part where, because the union, what union members will tell you is they are there to ensure that their membership gets due process from the department, from the city, from arbitrators. And I'm fine with that. Everybody's entitled to due process regardless of their profession. Where I think the system needs some improvement is arbitrators that understand the public safety world. Because frequently, and it's happened in Brooklyn Park, they've given us officers back that we tried to terminate, that, as the mayor knows, we actually invested money to pay them not to come back. So not only did they get their job back with their back pay while we were attempting to terminate them, we then said, we don't want you back so bad that we're going to give you a year's pay to walk away. Arbitrators don't think about those kind of things because they don't understand the impact that the officers that are there that know that that conduct was not appropriate. And I bring that individual back. What does that say? That that behavior, I guess, was okay, right? Or that arbitrators decided, well, you know, termination's a little strong. Let's just go with a 3-day suspension. That sends the message to the organization that it's okay, it's, you know, you can get in some trouble, it's not that big of a deal. And then the community in general, you know, sometimes there's body cam video, there's squad video, there's whatever of this incident, and they've seen it and they've passed judgment, like, that's it. And what gets lost is they think that I make that decision. Like, I'm condoning what happened. Like, yep, he's back, and I'm okay with that. So for me, it's not necessarily the union. They're there to make sure due process occurs. It's the process down the road.
Got it. Are we having conversations? Do you bring in community leaders? Because that's where, to be honest with you, that's where the distrust comes into play with so many folks within the community. That comes into play with some of our youth when they've seen bad behavior being rewarded in such a way. And that's where the distrust lies. How do we handle or either build those relationships back in our network where we live within this community to say this is something we're going to try to improve on without breaking it down and causing more tension?
Yeah. You've known me for quite some time, and I've never run from these conversations. Yeah. And I, along with the chief of Brooklyn Center, we started this work after the very first incident in this city, in this region, which was Jamar Clark, which was 2015. So we've had these conversations in high school auditoriums, gymnasiums, churches, barbershops. We've done the Facebook Live thing several times, acknowledging that even though the officers in this case might not be charged or may not be found guilty, our community was telling us that we're not satisfied with that.
Yep. And I remember coming into your office.
Yeah.
And I want to publicly give you credit. I remember walking into his office, and he gave me time. We talked about Jamar Clark for over a half hour or so. We talked about solutions. We talked about engaging the community officers in the work that I was doing as well. So we came up with some viable solutions. So I've seen his work firsthand as far as building relationships and coming up with solutions to try to make, because I remember walking into your office, I said, Chief, this stuff that happened, man, is unacceptable and cannot happen here in this city. And what are we doing to prevent? And we came up with some solutions, and hopefully we can kind of continue down that path.
And I need help, right? I need partners.
Yeah.
I'm a white guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't carry any street cred.
Yeah.
So I've intentionally or by happenstance have been introduced to community leaders that have been able to help me get to the folks that I need to get to talk to about how we operate.
Yeah, because what I find is the response when things do happen, when you have relationships built already, you can lower the tension level within the community a lot faster and quicker when you have those built-in relationships where you can pick up the phone and people can respond a lot quicker, faster in some of those areas. And here's one of my last questions that I have is that where do you see policing moving to more? Because what happens in the African American community is that we're seen to be policed, okay? We look at the police as they're always policing us, so we're always on defense. But when we look at other folks that are not of color, they're in a space of protection. You know, you hear that term that, you know, they're in a space of protection, but when it comes to a person of color, you know, we're always on defense of just constantly being policed and, you know, seen as harassed. And then we got to put our hands up, don't look forward, and we got to train our kids that this is, you know, don't move, you know, and you know, those type of things. And me being a 48-year-old man, I should not be afraid of police. I should be able to ask a courteous question, officer, why are you stopping me? Did I do something wrong? Can we talk for a second? Okay, officer, I'm about to grab my, you know, and so I shouldn't be in a state of panic. Right. And so how do you see policing changing in the years to come?
I'm going to turn part of it over to the mayor in a minute here, but certain areas of our city are over-policed. And 84% of the reasons that we have contact with people, regardless of their skin color, is a 911 call. And in certain pockets or challenged areas within Brooklyn Park, we are there a lot because we're getting a lot of 911 calls because there's a lot of crime in those areas. And if folks have not heard of Cities United, the mayor joined that on behalf of the city of Brooklyn Park back in 2014, I think it was. And it's a national movement of mayors to talk about the root causes of some of the systemic problems across the country, and that the police are left at the end of that dealing with all the other societal ills: mental health, substance abuse, poverty, education, all those things. And it's when I go to Cities United events, it's so enlightening to hear, yeah, okay, the police are here, right, whatever. Let's talk about not needing them anymore.
Yeah.
So it's that work, I think, that really is hopeful for me, and I'll let the mayor speak to it. He's kind of our spokesperson there, so.
Yeah, I think, we have a team, and it includes the community. It's not the mayor, it's not the police chief, it's far from it. It's actually community members, youth. Cities United is really about lowering the rate of violence for young males of color, plain and simple. And so I remember this quote because, A, it's a great quote, and I told the mayor I was going to steal it and use it every time. And he said that people ask, well, why do you focus so much? And he said, when I was growing up in a small town, as mayor in Mississippi, it was so boring there that he used to read the fire hydrant. And you know what a fire hydrant says? Aim at water, aim at fire. And so if you're going to focus, you don't focus on things that are going well, you focus where the fire is. And so that was his reason why he was there. Because to him, the fire was, I need to help young boys of diverse backgrounds overcome some of these things. Because when a kid gets to be 18 and you go, he's had all these chances, America's great, you get all these opportunities, why aren't you taking advantage of them? It wasn't at 18, it wasn't at 16, it wasn't 14, it wasn't 12, it wasn't 10. It started 1, 2, 3, when they got in school, where they segmented into a class because maybe they had some trauma in their life, so they were acting out in class. And so the response was, oh, this kid needs special help. Boom, now he gets all of a sudden he's getting diverted. And suddenly you can start to see the path. And so we were Cities United is about looking at different things. Dr. Bell, the Bell Foundation, provides a lot of data that we pull for things. Where do things start to change so that when they get to be 18, everybody says, you've had all this opportunity. No, they didn't. They missed it. There's a detour that happened, there were 3, and it just kept detouring them away from opportunity. And so having that conversation in the community, and having it with people who think, it's America, you got all these opportunities to do everything. What's the problem? No, they don't. And so trying to have those honest conversations. We try to have youth lead that effort. We have youth cohorts that tell us what to do. What do we need to have?
Got it. I know I get a lot of questions from our youth and parents that now we have a pandemic that we're dealing with, social distancing. What is it going to look like throughout the summer? What can we do to prepare our kids and youth so that we don't have this spike that we may see in violence? What can we do, and what's going to be the gaps that we need to fill as a community so that our community stays safe, kids may have some fun, and they hopefully get back to school?
Well, I think one of the recent council meetings I told my biggest fear was the fact that we know that if we give kids something good to do, they do it. If we give them nothing to do, they're going to be like me when I was a kid. I found stuff to do, but it wasn't necessarily good stuff. And so suddenly this summer, the heart of how we engage with youth, because of the pandemic, we're canceling programs. We're not able to do classes, open gyms, and so we're trying to find ways, and I wish we had answers. We know that it is so important to give youth opportunities to have fun, to do things, because if you give them good stuff, they grab it and they run. And so that's probably my biggest fear right now is for the first time ever, we are back to the days where we didn't do social services in Brooklyn Park, because that's the county's job. Now we're back to that, and we know that youth. And I think if I can add something, is we really try to do root cause analysis. What's really happening?
Gotcha.
And so last summer, a lot of the excitement at Huntington apartment was we had youth that weren't from Brooklyn Park who arrive on the bus because after hours there was nothing going on. It was because of the last bus. And so our youth are telling us it's not us causing these problems. Kids coming here to have fun because this is the party place. And so our own youth were telling us what was going on. And so we had to focus. So we're trying to figure out ways to provide services for kids who don't even live here, but we need them to engage with that. And the last thing I would mention is one thing that we do is we have a youth engagement team that's funded out of the police department, but its whole job is to engage with youth. They're not officers. They are, I don't know what you'll, they're like everything, the all-in-ones. And so their job is to get out there and engage on that. And so I worry because I know how important it is to Brooklyn Park to give kids that chance.
What do you worry about most, Chief, to keep you up at night in this next couple months?
What does the summer look like?
Yeah.
Honestly, going back to the youth issue early on with the COVID, we have a great relationship with our Park and Rec department. And to their credit and to our city council's credit, we were intentional in reaching out to some of our neighbors, specifically Minneapolis. Like, what is your Park and Rec programming going to look like this summer? Because if you shut down, these kids need to go somewhere, right? So we've had those ongoing conversations, and at one point, Minneapolis, who has their own health department, decided they were going to limit activities in parks. They were taking down basketball hoops, they were taking down tennis nets and all that kind of stuff. And we said, consciously, we're not going to do that. If kids want to gather and interact with one another in violation of the executive order by 2 individuals or 4 individuals, we don't care. And our city council basically echoed that. Like, they're going to find something to do in a group of in excess of the social distancing guideline. So do we rather have them doing positive things or negative things? So I am hopeful that a lot of the stuff that we've done with our Park and Rec department is going to keep kids occupied with positive things. Because going back to what the mayor had said, we did have a pretty volatile summer last year. And it was people coming from around the metro area to go to a specific challenged area that wasn't being managed well. And it became our problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're leaving the nets up. To answer the question, we are not taking any nets down. And when residents have called and said, there's 10 kids playing basketball out there, they're violating COVID. I was like, okay, I'm okay with that. Because they're going to play basketball somewhere.
Gotcha.
Let them play. I'm fine with that.
Well, I just want you guys to know that my overall commitment is to be here to help and to assist and to give you guys as much guidance as I can with the temperature that I hear from the community and to add my input. And so I think this is an effort that we need to work together. And by all means, we're getting folks from all over the Twin Cities here in Brooklyn Park, and we should be the model of what other cities should look like. So thank you for your work. Chief, thank you. It's been a pleasure, man, working with you all these years. I want to continue our work. And Jay, I'm looking forward to working with you and Chief with the fire department. I'm looking forward to you guys being engaged with us too, to find you some recruits. I'm sure we can find some folks that would love to be on a truck somewhere to help put out some fires. So yeah. I'm gonna put it over to you now.
Yeah, I think we were just going to kind of wrap up and give everybody a chance to thank. And first I want to thank Terry for coming here cold and doing a great job. So we appreciate it, because a real conversation is what we wanted, and I think we had a real one. We didn't have a scripted event, and that's absolutely not what we wanted. And I know this, tomorrow you're going to be back in Brooklyn Park. The next weekend you're going to be back in Brooklyn Park. And so I just want to say thank you for all the work that you do. And people, if you don't know and you see Terry, you should be asking him how you can help. So I think that's what, if I may speak for you, people should be doing. So
Thank you.
thank you. So I think maybe Jay, if you had any last words or comments.
Sure, thanks, Mayor. First of all, I want to thank all residents and other people that are participating this evening as part of our Facebook Live programming. I want to thank Mr. Austin. You described yourself earlier as a community servant. We really appreciate you as a community leader. Folks like you are what make Brooklyn Park the phenomenal community it is, and the difference that you make in our community does not go unnoticed. So thanks, Terry, for all your great work. I just want to reiterate what I said at the my opening comments, that myself, our leadership team, I know our council is committed to the work that it's going to take to address the disparities that exist in our community, to address those systems that we know are failing many of our residents today. And we are going to be identifying solutions to those. And we want to do that in partnership with the community. Brooklyn Park has prided itself on being that, wanting that community voice and having that partnership with our community. So I do invite everyone to reach out to us in whatever way makes sense for you all, whether that's email, phone calls, dropping by, participating in our events that we're going to have this summer. And I just thank you again for the opportunity this evening for us to have this conversation with you, and thank Terry again as well. So thank you.
Chief Cunningham.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Terry, for great facilitation tonight. As your community's fire chief, I took an oath to serve. And while Craig and I might wear different uniforms, or the colors of our shirts are a little bit different, we both have that mission to service, and both of our departments are here to serve our community. That oath that I took, I take very seriously. Every time I pin the badge on my uniform in the morning, I know the power and the responsibility that comes with that. And these discussions and these dialogues are important. And as that community servant, I want to continue those discussions. How can I, as a fire chief, how can our organization continue service to provide that level of care to our community that they expect and deserve? So I look forward to continuing those discussions. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier, talking about diversity, is I'm one of very few openly gay fire chiefs in the country, and that took a long time for me to come to acceptance of that. But now, using that and my own personal, strength to have those discussions with other people, and to know that there are opportunities out there, and that people are here to listen and make change, and positive change in the communities that they serve. So I look forward to those discussions and to continuing this, because there's a lot of work to go. And I hope to kind of circle back to one of the questions you asked earlier, is where you see yourself in 3 months or 6 months. And I hope all of us at some point can sit back on the stage and reflect on this moment, and remember Mr. Floyd and the movement that created, in his honor and his name, and all those that have suffered previously, and make that positive change that we want to see, and let that be the beacon of hope across the entire country, because I believe that can start here.
Thank you, Terry. And for those that don't know Terry and what those conversations look like when he drops in unannounced to my office to have a conversation, he doesn't say what I want to hear, but he tells me what I need to hear. So those that don't know Terry, he doesn't walk around and carry my flag for me. He comes in and lets me have it right between the eyes most of the time. But I appreciate that in community members, and I appreciate that in the staff that I have, is don't tell me what you think I want to hear, tell me what I need to hear. And so thank you. Lastly, I would just say, as we move forward with these meetings, I really want to encourage community members that may have felt uncomfortable going to these kind of events in the past, or didn't feel like their voice would be heard. Please come out, please participate however we end up figuring this out, if it's, if it is all Facebook Live or whatever, because as you had said earlier too, Terry, we need to hear from everybody, right? I don't have all the answers. Right? I can make a decision on what I think is right. That doesn't mean it's going to have any impact. So I just strongly encourage folks to come on out and let me have it. I've never shied away, and I'm not going to start. So.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody, Terry and the chiefs and Jay and staff and the residents watching at home, and people who have questions. And I'm sure this will generate more questions, which is what it's supposed to do. Brooklyn Park, we pride ourselves in our engagement, not just in word, but in deed. And with COVID, we're looking for different ways. And so there's a thing called a telephone, and it's amazing. If you call someone, you actually have a conversation. And I would say I've had more of those conversations with more people that talk about things. And what I would share with everyone is most of the people contacting me are asking to be part of the solution. I've had youth who are going to take a platform to the state capitol. and we help to introduce them to different legislators. We've got people who are here or retired who want to help. And so I think that's what we really need is help. The idea that somehow all this is going to change if we change some policies in the police department, suddenly everything is perfect. That is absolutely wrong. It is lots of changes, and it's going to take all of us, and it's going to exist out besides the city council. It's going to be people in the community, it's going to be churches, it's going to be people making a difference in people's lives. We do not suffer from too many people who want to help young people of color who need help and mentors and examples and just someone to listen to them. And so we would love anybody who wants to get in touch. And I will just share the name. Antonio Smith is kind of our point person for Cities United, my brother's keeper. And everybody who contacts me, he's the first name I hand out. And usually I text them their number right away, because the faster I get them to Antonio, the faster they're going to get plugged in into what we are working on. And so he is very good about getting people connected. And so I just, on behalf of the council, I want to thank everybody. I'm here, but I'm here to represent the council. So you see me, but there's really 6 others who are just as important. We all are equal roles in the council. We all have equal votes, and that we want people to know that we're going to continue to engage. We're going to continue to listen. I think listening is the most important factor right now, and action will come out of what we hear from people. And what we like to do in Brooklyn Park is real things, not things that make people feel good, but that accomplish nothing. And so we also want to do Brooklyn Park solutions. Bless other cities and other areas. We want things to be grown here and ideas, because we think that's the best way we do things. So again, I want to thank everybody and to let you know that this is just the start, and this is just the first point of kind of re-engaging, and all opinions are welcome and valued. So thank you.